Hey, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. Today we're going to pick up with Unit 13, and we're going to start with lesson number 6, The Rise of Conservatism in America. We've been looking at the presidencies of Richard Nixon, and that's going to take us all the way through to Clinton. Today we're going to look at conservatism, which means the start of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started. What we're going to start with, of course, is our unit focus questions. We will not answer these unit focus questions right now, but at the end of the unit, we will come back and we'll address all three of them. Number one is, what effect did the Nixon presidency have on the American public psyche? And number two, why did conservatism become such an attractive political philosophy in the United States? And three, the final one, describe the effect of technology and scientific innovation on the increased globalization of the United States. Once again, we'll come back and we'll answer those three questions at the end of the unit, and that'll take place at some point today. What we're going to do now is look at our academic vocabulary and our content vocabulary. Just as we always tell you, take out your journals, write those terms down and define them yourself, and as they come up in the lesson, we'll address as many of them as we can. All right, we do have two lesson-focused questions that we will address at the end of the lesson. Number one, identify the basic tenets of liberalism and conservatism as it relates to American politics. And two, how did the religious right shift the South and rural areas to a more conservative political philosophy? And we're talking about the South, we're talking about us here in Mississippi and throughout the rest of the Sun Belt, and we'll identify what that region is shortly. All right, before we get started though, let's look at our journal topic for today and with our Do Now activity. What we want you to do is write down the following question. What role should religion play in governance of the United States of America? So what role should religion have in the direction and the governance of our country? So go ahead with that. Go ahead and take a few minutes and formulate your answer, and we'll be right back on the other side. Well, you should have had enough time that you were able to go through, of course, and formulate an answer. So when we're talking about governance here, we're talking about the actual running of the country in terms of the direction in which it goes in. So when we're looking at religion, you know, this country, in the minds of many, was created on the idea of freedom of religion. And there is a tremendous belief that the founders didn't, of course, want religion, of course, to take part in the governance of the country, but we found it, you know, throughout our history that's kind of changed a little bit, and we're finding that religion has more and more been involved in terms of the direction in which the country takes. But we'll let you hear a few stories, and we'll tell a few stories about, you know, how that has evolved over the last 100 years or so. What we'll do first, we'll talk about the rise of conservatism. Liberalism dominated American politics through the 1960s and 1970s, primarily because of Democrats like JFK, LBJ, and Jimmy Carter. And even the Republican president, to some degree, promoted liberal agendas in the time that they were in the office. For instance, the Warren Court of the 1960s increased the federal power to end segregation. Roe v. Wade in 1973, the proposal of the Equal Rights Amendment, the Gun Control Act of 1968, and the creation of the environmental movement were spurred by liberal ideas. And that's what led to the rise of conservatism in the United States. There were a lot of people that felt like that the country was going in a too liberal direction, and they wanted it reined in some, and they wanted conservative values to be the driving force behind American politics. We'll talk about the conservative map. When we're talking about conservatism, we're usually talking to some degree about one particular region that's been dominated by conservative politics, and you can see that, of course, in the presidents that they've elected or they supported, you know, in the last 50 to 60 years. The effect of liberalism in the West and South in what would become the Sun Belt allowed conservatism to grow. The campaign promises of Barry Goldwater in 1964 to reduce taxes and restrict the size of government gained favor in the region, which after World War II became the fastest growing region in the United States. And we're talking about the fastest growing region, we're talking about states like Texas, Arizona. We're looking at some of those, Florida. So when we look at those high sun areas in the United States of America, and usually in the Southeast and the Southwest and the Deep South, this is what the area that we call the Sun Belt. In the 1980s, the religious right pushed conservative ideas and televangelists like Billy Graham, Oral Roberts and Pat Robertson steered their congregations to conservative principles, creating what we would call the moral majority, promoting traditional family values. We told you in terms of looking at the map of the Sun Belt, once again, all this area that you look at, that you see in red here, would be classified as the Sun Belt. And when you think about it, some of our larger most populous cities are in some of these red states. States like Texas, of course, Arizona, Florida, Georgia. So when we're looking at the Sun Belt and talking about these ideas, this is a region that traditionally has been the one where the conservatism began, well, or at least was able to take hold a lot quicker than other places throughout the United States. Here on the left, we have Pat Robertson, who will emerge as a presidential candidate, or a candidate to get the Republican nomination. And on the right, we have Billy Graham, and they constitute what we would call, and their congregations constitute what we would call the religious right. Here you have Reverend Jerry Falwell. He was the self-declared leader of the moral majority. All right, what we're going to do at this time is we're going to pause and view a video on the rise of Christian conservatism, particularly the rise of Mary and Pat Robertson as a viable Republican candidate in 1988, and his impact on the American political landscape. You can access the video from the lesson description. Upon viewing the video, complete the activities which accompany the video, convert your work into a PDF, and turn it into your teacher for a grade. Good luck and enjoy the video at this time. All right, you should have had enough time that you were able to go through, of course, and see the video that basically centered around Pat Robertson as he emerges, of course, as a candidate to oppose the Republican incumbent Vice President George H.W. Bush, who eventually does get the Republican nomination in 1988. And what it does, though, is it kind of sets the stage for Republican candidates going forward. If they were going to get elected, they needed, of course, to get the religious right or the moral majority, of course, in their corner. And when you look back at the Republican presidents that have emerged since 1988, we're going to find that the ones that have won the Christian vote. All right, let's talk about conservative advocacy for a few minutes. Beginning in the 1980s, but even before that, we're going to find that there are going to be some organizations that will be created that will push a conservative agenda. And in looking at one of the most famous one is the National Rifle Association, which was created way back in 1871, and it becomes active as a lobbying group to protect Second Amendment rights for Americans. It aligned itself with the Republican Party and conservatism in the 1970s, and through the use of the Supreme Court, we're going to find that they have been able, and then of course legislation, they've been able to push their agenda, in American politics. The pro-life movement also aligned itself with conservatism in the Republican Party, as they saw liberals and Democrats as threats to traditional family values because of Roe v. Wade. The Heritage Foundation is one of the organizations that are going to be created to promote the conservative agenda, and it took an active role in creating conservative policies for political candidates like Ronald Reagan, who was elected president in 1980, and also will go on to influence the presidencies of George H.W. Bush, George Bush, and Donald J. Trump. All right, here we have the National Rifle Association's emblem, and then on the right we have the Heritage Foundation, and these have been the conservative lobbies that, of course, that lobby American politicians, conservative politicians, of course, to push their agenda. Planned Parenthood and ACLU have typically been advocacies or liberal lobbies, of course, that have pushed a more liberal agenda. So kind of felt like we need to throw them in there since we threw in the conservative lobbies also. All right. That gets us to the lesson focus questions. What we're going to do is look at 2 lesson focus questions as we promised. And the first is to identify the basic tenets of liberalism and conservatism as relate to American politics. And 2, how did the religious right shift the South and rural areas to a more conservative political philosophy? What we're going to do, of course, is look at the first lesson focus questions to identify the basic tenets of liberalism and conservatism as it relates to American politics. And as we said, what we're going to do, we didn't talk a whole lot about liberalism because we pushed and talked about liberalism quite a bit throughout our time studying U.S. history. Conservatism becomes more important, of course, in contemporary history. That's why we're attacking it now. But we'll go back and recap some of the things about liberalism. First and foremost, Liberalism advocates for government intervention to address social inequality, support individual rights, and promote social justice. If you remember, it was some of the basic tenets, of course, of the progressive movement. Liberals supported progressive taxation, environmental protections, and universal health care. Conservatism advocates for limited government, individual responsibility, traditional values, and free market principles. Conservatives advocate for lower taxes, deregulation of businesses, and strong national defense. And if you look at them closely, you can see how they diverge and go in different directions, of course, for the country. Number two, how did the religious right shift the South and rural areas to a more conservative political philosophy? Simply by mobilizing Christian voters around issues like abortion, gay rights, of course, and school prayer. Post-1970, religious values were aligned with the conservative Republican political platform. We hope you enjoyed hearing some of the things about conservatism and its rise, of course, in the United States of America. We hope that you will gain some insights in terms of what liberalism was and how liberalism dominated American politics for a long time. And we're going to find that Republican candidates, of course, will start picking up the mantle of conservatism and start pushing that agenda, especially with the help of organizations like the Heritage Foundation. Once again, though, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. And do what we always tell you, do your own research, reach your own conclusions, and with that, we'll see you next time.